The NBA has announced its full all-star teams, and there's a bit of controversy, but I also just want to give a little bit of a recap on the subject. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. But first of all, as always, how's it going, y'all? Conrad Sports Cards here. Um, you already know how it is. First of all, real quick, I have a load of clothes in the dryer. My dryer's super old, so I hope you can't hear it, but you probably can, unfortunately. And I also hope it doesn't go off because it's super, super loud when it does. But unfortunately, if it happens, I can't do anything about it. I'm very sorry. But as always, I've got my notes. Let's just get straight into this one. But here's something I want to address before we get into it. A lot of people are looking at not just Devin Booker, but he's the main one. A lot of these guys, and they're saying they're snubbed. They should have made the All-Star team, blah, 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 blah. Here's what I'm going to say. Here's what I want to say to the people that think that these certain guys got snubbed. I understand that there are certain players that play at an all-star level each year. However, every player that actually performs at an all-star level will not make an all-star team, and here's why. There are more people that play at an all-star level than there are all-star spots, right? And so in order for one of your picks to actually make it to the all-star team, they have to replace someone that is currently in the NBA all-star roster. And unfortunately, at least in my opinion, every single player that made the all-star team this year actually deserved to make it. I'll discuss it later. You can potentially argue with me. Like I said, we'll discuss it later in the video. But 90% of NBA fans don't take that into consideration. Someone has to be replaced if your pick is going to make it into the All-Star game. And I'm really annoyed by that. I wanted to get that out of the way before we discuss, everything, right? I'm calming down a little bit more, so let's go through this. So the Eastern Conference we have starting. Hang on, there we go. Starting in the Eastern Conference, we have Kyrie Irving, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Joel Embiid. Overall, I think all these guys deserve to be starters. Kyrie Irving, I guess, could have been replaced with Jaylen Brown, James Harden, or Zach LaVine, but honestly, all four of those guys are playing at the same level. So if one of those guys were to make it over Kyrie Irving, I wouldn't have cared, and I don't care that Kyrie Irving is over any of those guys. All of them are playing at pretty much the same level. Bradley Beal is kind of I think it's backcourt. I always get front court and backcourt mixed up, but Bradley Beal is regardless pretty much a lock. He is a lock, no matter what, to be NBA All-Star starter because he's leading the team, or not the team, but he's leading the league in points per game, and the Wizards are finally improving as an NBA team, which is really nice to see. So he definitely deserves to be an all-star starter this year. Then the reserves, as we said before, Jaylen Brown, James Harden, Zach LaVine, but then we also have, excuse me, I had to burp. Then we also have Julius Randle, Ben Simmons, Jason Tatum, and Nicola Vucevic. So the three guys that I've mainly been hearing as far as who should not be an all-star out of these guys are Julius Randle, Ben Simmons, and Nicola Vucevic. We're going to talk about each one of them individually. So let's start with Julius Randle. I dislike Julius Randle. He's one of those players that I just don't really like. I don't like his work ethic a ton. He's never really seemed to have much of one. He also kind of has a little bit of an attitude, and he's kind of a boring player to watch. I'm just not the biggest fan of watching Julius Randle play. But he deserves to be an all-star this year regardless. The man is averaging 23 and 11 this year, which is, I think, like career highs. I might be wrong. He's also shooting crazy efficient from three, I believe, at about 42%, which is insane. Real quick, 42% on, I believe, 4.5 attempts per game, which is insane for a player that has averaged less than that, I think, every year in his entire career. And he's normally a pretty bad or average three-point shooter. So considering that he is shooting 40% or above 40% this season on 4.5 attempts per game is insane. He's also stepped it up a lot defensively, but most importantly, the Knicks are a playoff team this year, at least right now. They're the 7th seed in the Eastern Conference, which hasn't happened in a long time. And even looking at this roster on paper, you would say that this team is not a playoff caliber team, but they are in the running. They are currently the 7th seed, like I said, in the Eastern Conference, and that can largely be credited to Julius Randle. He deserves to be an all-star this year. Next up, Nikola Vucevic. Don't even try to get, I don't know if you heard that, but my dryer just went off. Anyway, Nikola Vucevic, the man deserves to be an all-star this year. He's the most underrated player in the league and has been for quite a few seasons. You can't even try to argue me on that one, at least in my opinion. This man definitely deserves to be the all-star, or at least an all-star this year. Let me explain. So far, the Magic recently in the past 6 games are 4-2 after they just lost, I believe, last night, like this current night or the night before. I'm not completely sure. But they're 4-2 in their last 6 games, and that is pretty much entirely because of him. Here's why. Jonathan Isaac has been out the entire year. Markelle Fultz went down with an ACL tear early in the year, or it was an Achilles injury. I don't even remember. Aaron Gordon and Cole Anthony are both out with injuries as well. And Evan Fournier, I believe, has also been out at some point this season. That is the 5 best players on this Orlando Magic team after, besides Nicola Vucevic. The next 5 best players on this team have all been out for most of, all of, or at least a part of the NBA season. And he is putting the team on his back. And they have been 4-2 in their last 6, although they haven't been exactly amazing this season. I believe 12th in the Eastern Conference, but he has really been putting them on his back and is averaging near career numbers. He's an all-star this year, in my opinion. The next up is Ben Simmons. I hate Ben Simmons. Least favorite player in the entire league. I've expressed it multiple times before, but there isn't even much of an argument for him, in my opinion, at least as to why he shouldn't be an all-star. You can't just look at his stats and say that he doesn't deserve to be an all-star, because actually, if you do look at his stats, I think that he should still be an all-star because of them. But let me explain a little bit further. The Philadelphia 76ers are the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, and I understand that Joel Embiid is playing at an MVP level this year, but it's not just because of that. Ben Simmons plays a huge role in what they're able to accomplish, at least so far this season. He's averaging about 16, 8, and 8. So he's one of the best playmakers in the league. He is one of the best, or if not the best, rebounding guard in the league, because of course he is pretty freaking big. And even if his offensive game isn't extremely polished, he still averages, 16 points a game. He puts in, he still gets his points when the team needs him to, right? And then, of course, he's also in the running for Defensive Player of the Year, at least in my opinion. Top 4, top 3, as far as that race goes. What else am I supposed to say? That's an all-star season right there, So the snubs that have been behind him are Trae Young, Demonta Sabonis, Fred VanVleet, and Tobias Harris. I'll give a quick breakdown on each of them. Tobias Harris, not bad, but Philly definitely isn't deserving enough to have 3 All-Stars this year, at least in my opinion. Fred VanVleet, honestly, real good case for him this season. Especially because the Raptors are fighting back and they're now, I believe, the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference. So that's pretty impressive. But they're still only sitting at 500, and they're not just improving because of him. OG Anunoby has stepped it up a bit this year. Pascal Siakam has as well. Norman Powell, Kyle Lowry, Chris Boucher. They've had multiple factors or multiple players that are really helping improve this team this season, or at least turning their season around. It can't just all be accredited to Fred VanVleet, although he definitely should. He definitely does deserve his credit. Demonta Sabonis, as a Pacers fan, this really kind of pains me to say, but I wouldn't have him as an all-star this year. He's playing pretty well. He's been a double-double machine this year for sure. Pacers are playing pretty well, and we have had a good amount of injuries, but kind of what I was saying before, who would I really replace him with, or replace in his place, right? No one. I think that everyone here has performed better than him, even though he's playing super, super well. I just don't think he's doing enough. And Trae Young. I hate to say this about Trae Young, especially so early in his career, but honestly, I don't know if his play style or what he does on the court attributes to winning. On paper, and from what we've seen so far, and I understand DeAndre Ayton has gone down with an injury, which has impacted this team a bit, but on paper, and looking at even just the amount of depth this team has, they should not be the 11th seed in the Eastern Conference, and they should not be 3-8 in the entire month of February. That just can't happen, at least in my opinion. And he's also struggled a lot, especially early in the season, which of course has affected his overall statistics. So that doesn't exactly help him as far as the all-star, argument goes. But then, even then, you just look at the other guys ahead of him. They did more than him, or they've done better than him, especially in certain areas like winning. And so that's why they deserve to be ahead of him, I guess, except for Nikola Vucevic. But we understand that that's because of a lot of injuries, not just one. So that's the Eastern Conference. Moving on to the Western Conference, we have Luka Doncic, Stephen Curry, LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, and Kawhi Leonard as the starters. Luka Doncic, in my opinion, should not be the starter, or at least a starter. It should be Damian Lillard, which he actually agrees with. He said that Damian Lillard should have been a starter, or honestly, Donovan Mitchell should have been as well in his place, because the Jazz are exceeding everyone's expectations this year, and Donovan Mitchell is kind of the quote-unquote main reason, even though he's not the reason. He's seen as the reason to why they're, the best team in the league this season, surprisingly. So either one of those guys I would have taken over Luka Doncic, at least in my opinion. But then off the bench, the reserves, we have Anthony Davis, Paul George, Rudy Gobert, Damian Lillard, Donovan Mitchell, Chris Paul, and Zion Williamson. Now, Anthony Davis will be replaced by most likely Devin Booker this season, although, of course, we will get into some of these snubs in the argument as to why they could potentially replace Anthony Davis. But the two guys that I've heard most people talk about as to why they don't deserve to be an all-star this year are Rudy Gobert and Chris Paul. First of all, we'll start with Rudy Gobert. This man deserves more credit. By far. He's probably the leader for Defensive Player of the Year, although my man Miles Turner is averaging 3.5 blocks per game, which is definitely making it hard for Gobert. But Gobert is probably the biggest reason as to why the Utah Jazz are not doing as well as they are. But as far as defense goes, like top 3 defense in the league, he can be the biggest factor. He is the biggest factor for that, no doubt. If you take him off this roster and replace him really with any other center in the NBA, they're probably 15, like middle of the pack. They have some good defensive pieces, but he literally makes such a big impact. His interior presence is just scary for a lot of guys. And it's not like he's all defense and no offense. He still puts in like 12, 13, 14, 15 points a game, right? And I mean, sure, it all comes from around the basket, but 15 points a game is 15 points a game regardless. That 15 points a game can definitely dictate the outcome of your season, right? So, he's not just a defensive monster. He still does well on offense as well. And then Chris Paul. I love Chris Paul, so maybe that kind of goes in here a little bit, but what can I say? This man has been throughout his career and is one of the most complete point guards in the game. He's doing it all. He scores, obviously from all the 3 levels. He's been pretty clutch this season. He is one of the best playmakers in the entire league this year. He's an excellent defender, especially at the guard position, and especially for his size, because traditionally when you look at a guy like him, you wouldn't think he's a good defender. But even at his size and at his older age, he's still playing well. And overall, and this is where the argument comes in for Devin Booker, it kind of becomes a question of who has a bigger impact on the Suns team. I'm going to go with Chris Paul for the reasons I just listed. But I think he's the reason, or the biggest reason, why this Suns team is sitting at 20-10, which is 4th in the Eastern Conference, but that would be 1st in the Eastern Conference as far as percentages go. As far as the record goes, that would be 1st in the Eastern Conference, and they are the 4th seed still in the East and the Western Conference. And I think that Chris Paul is the biggest reason for that, and something I didn't even mention. I just smacked my sound trap. Sorry. But I think another reason that I didn't even mention was his leadership. This team is super, super young, and he's really brought them together with his veteran presence, with his leadership, his hard work, what he does during practice and during the game as well. He deserves it. What can I say? He deserves it. And then the Western Conference All-Star snubs: DeMar DeRozan, Mike Conley, Brandon Ingram, and Devin Booker. I actually just realized I didn't put those guys in order, but I don't think it really matters because I think it's pretty close between these guys. DeMar DeRozan, honestly, he's putting up a solid fight, but he just isn't really doing enough. I understand that the Spurs are exceeding expectations this year at, I believe, the 5th seed. He is, expanded his game. He kind of added a bit of a 3-point shot, even though it's not amazing, but it's much better than it's been in years prior. But he's just not doing enough. And, Keldon Johnson has really stepped it up this year as well. DeJounte Murray is still playing pretty well. And Lonnie Walker is doing all right. But he's not the main reason or the sole reason as to why this team is doing as well as they are. And he's honestly kind of taken a little bit of a back step this year. So I probably wouldn't have him, as an all-star. Mike Conley, I love this guy, but the Jazz, I understand that they're exceeding expectations. They're 25-6 or 26-6 or whatever their record is. But they're not good enough to deserve 3 all-stars this year. And also, I just don't think, once again, I don't think that, even statistically, he's just done enough. I don't think that even his impact on the team is really enough to put him into that conversation, especially over some of these other guys. Next up is Brandon Ingram. I don't think the Pelicans are good enough to have 2 all-stars this year. It's either him or Zion, and Zion is having one of the best seasons of any player in history since, I believe, prime Shaq in the paint. The guy deserves to be an all-star this year for sure, and I love Brandon Ingram, but Zion is playing out of his mind. He's become so underrated at this point, at least in my opinion. He's been an absolute menace, and, for that reason, I'd say Brandon Ingram is out. Devin Booker, he puts up a really good conversation. Once again, I just think that Chris Paul has a larger impact on this team. I guess it's a little bit arguable, but for the reasons I listed earlier, I'm picking Chris Paul over Devin Booker, at least this time. And regardless, Devin Booker is probably going to be making it in over Anthony Davis this year anyways. So it doesn't really matter, I guess, all that much. But And that's all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and check out the channel, or the Spotify, whatever you're listening to this on. Check out some of the other episodes that I've put out. If you did like this episode, there's going to be other episodes that you like as well. Also in the description is a link tree to all of my other socials. You can follow me there and get a lot more of my content as well. So yeah, go ahead and check it out. But once again, thank you for tuning in, sorry, and I will see you guys next time.